And then you can start realizing that, hey, I can start scaling these in different types of ways, putting more marketing to it, putting more sales behind it. And then as that builds, then you'll start realizing that, hey, this can cover what I used to make over here in this other space. So
welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you're enjoying the show, do me one quick favor and leave us that rating and review. It helps us learn what's working for you, but also get some feedback that can help this show work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, we got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Chase Minnifield. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to KasmanCapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to KasmanCapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. Now, Chase is an accomplished entrepreneur who started his journey at the age of 25, following his career as a professional football player in the NFL. His first business venture was Helping Hand LLC, a company that offers moving, cleaning, and apartment turnover services to college dormitories and student housing complexes. And this led to his second venture, Easy Turn. With Easy Turn, Chase's goal is to help property managers do more through streamlined and automated operations. Let's welcome to the show, Chase Minnifield.
thank you, John. Appreciate that. It's a great intro.
Absolutely. Hey, Chase, look, I went over your bio at a very, very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah. So I'm an athlete turned entrepreneur at the cusp of it. Um, I went to the NFL and wasn't really cut out to be what I thought it was, type situation. And sometimes the grass isn't as green as you may expect. But I had to, I love that passion of chasing something. So after that, I created companies, and I've loved the journey of trying to build a business, successful businesses. And I've kind of ended up into this property management sector, which I didn't necessarily expect to be in. But the University of Kentucky was kind of my gap where, I was actually able to, start building some contracts at Lexington, Kentucky. That's where Helping Hands started at. And, I learned in that space this idea of student housing turn. And student housing turn is much bigger than anything else I've seen in the real estate sector since I've been here. It's everybody moves out at once and everybody moves in at once. And you're looking at, 7,000, 8,000 units being flipped at the same time in a 2-week to a 2-month span. And I was in that place of doing that work. I did it across the country. And I realized everybody's doing it the same way. They was doing spreadsheets and phone calls and emails, and everybody was running around like, chickens with their heads cut off. And every year I showed up, it was the same thing. So I was like, I need to put some technology in this space, specifically for project management of vendors, specifically trying to have transparency of what's going on at a site to a higher level, especially when you have multiple people in multiple places around site. I think that was where the difficulty lay when you had spreadsheets. So we created Easy Turn, and Easy Turn at the cusp of it was the ability for a vendor to tell you when he started and when he's finished with his work via his mobile device, and that being able to transfer over to the property manager's platform that says, "Hey, this is finished, this is done, this is not complete." And made it better for everybody to make easier decisions. It's turned into a lot bigger platform now, where we handle like inspections and service requests and all these other different types of issues that come up on site. But we are at the cusp of it, a better way for property managers to utilize the vendors in the community around them to execute the day-to-day jobs on their site. We are not a property management software, which is like the accounting piece of the business, right? We integrate into the Appfolios and the Entradas and the MRIs and things of that nature. And most people use our platform for doing the work, actual work being done at the site. And they use the tenant communication and things of that nature with the other software. So that's kind of the down and dirty of how I've got to where I am.
Man, I love it, Chase. You talked about, your journey to the NFL, that not really panning out the way you expected, moving into kind of the real estate side, specifically student housing and the terms, and realizing that, hey, there was really this antiquated approach where I mean, with student housing in particular, pretty much all the units become available at the same time. You got a really short window to get those
Yeah,
units turned and ready to go. And you've got to be on top of it because there really isn't an option to push it back, a
yeah,
month or a few weeks when you've got students ready to start school and they don't have their housing available. So I understand the pressure could be pretty immense there. And you talked about some of the abilities and the solutions that Easy Turn is able to offer for these different property management companies. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. But I think what's interesting is that, and I'll talk about this more from an entrepreneur standpoint, because you started off with one career, right? For you, it was the NFL. For many of our listeners, it could be whatever they went to school for, wherever they thought their journey was going to take them. And at
yeah.
some point, you realized that it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. Those are the words you use, right?
Yep.
So, talk to me about kind of coming to that realization and then having to pivot or adjust to what was next for you.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a tough time frame. I think anytime you have a vision and an idea of what you want to do, and it's not necessarily, I guess, in my thought process of the NFL was a 15, 19, 20-year career, white picket fence, largest contracts in history of the league. You know what I'm saying? Those type of situations right there. And injuries plagued me a little bit. And I end up, just realizing that, hey, you know, you became damaged goods in that system. And I really one thing I really wanted to do and why I decided not to like go work for anybody else was the fact of like I wanted to control my destiny and I didn't want people to control my destiny. And that's what I really found out was the NFL is that no matter how hard I worked, it still wasn't my decision on if I was going to be good enough to be a part of a team or a group or to get paid from anybody. So um I wanted to make that decision. I wanted to be able to have that decision. I wanted to be able to control my destiny. I wanted to be able to control my outcomes. And I didn't want to have to, basically depend on somebody else to pay my bills.
I appreciate you sharing that because I think again there's this image people have of athletes and what it means to make it, right, to get drafted, to become a
Yeah,
professional athlete, and it's like it's a dream for a lot of people, right? And to your point, it's that at the end of the day, it's still a career, like any
yeah,
other career, and someone else has the authority or the ability to decide whether or not they want you to be a part of that future,
yeah,
or whether or not you fit, and to take control over your future and to take control of your destiny. It's something I know a lot of people are looking at, and it's one of the reasons a lot of people do look to real estate because it is a great pathway for them to be able to gain that control that they're looking for. For someone who is maybe on the fence, and they're at a point where they feel like maybe I should just work a little bit harder at this, or maybe I'm facing this obstacle. Should I persevere and keep going? Or should I use this as a sign that maybe I should pivot to something else? Just talk to us about kind of, your thought process and what
yeah.
ultimately made you realize that, hey, you know what, instead of trying one more time to rehab, recover, and get signed or join a team, why don't I take this chance to actually pivot into a different career field or something that I can have more control over?
Yeah, definitely. So if I could have done it over again, I would have had multiple checks and multiple income streams while I was still playing in NFL. Like if I could have had a rental property, and that's what I kind of mentor kids on now, is to get you another stream of income that is like we talked about earlier, passive. That doesn't take as much of your time, but you are still seeing that there is money that you can make outside of this one check. Even though this is a big check, there's still money and revenue that you can make outside of this thing right here. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short in that transition, specifically in the NFL, is that um, we're depending on this big check, and you're like, where am I going to get another size check like this? And you don't really know where that's going to come from. But if you can generate in entrepreneurship, I realize if you can generate 1,000, you can generate 10,000. If you can generate 10,000, you can generate 100,000. It may take a little bit longer to get to those points. But I remember when I finally hit like the level where I was like, all right, I'm making as much money as I was making in NFL. And I was like, my body's not hurt. I'm not icing every day. I'm not going to practice. And I had a better, higher quality of life. from my expectations. So what I would suggest to people if they were in that situation is to get started on something, not necessarily quit your jobs or anything like that, but get started on something outside of that and start seeing second and third revenue streams. And then you can start realizing that, hey, I can start scaling these in different types of ways, putting more marketing to it, putting more sales behind it. And then as that builds, then you'll start realizing that, hey, this can cover what I used to make over here in this other space. So that would be my suggestion.
I think that's great advice, especially just having anything, even if it's not a lot of money, because to the point you made, I think some people struggle with getting started or at least seeing that first step. And if you have one big source of income, it's hard to fathom that, oh, well, why would I even start with a rental property? Like that doesn't come close to replacing my salary. But the way you said it is spot on. It's like, but if you can make a little bit of money from this, you can scale that to the point where it does make more money, right? And that's with any business or any endeavor. But most people won't even get started, so they can't even see how to grow it. And it's so much easier to grow something once you've started it than to just get started in the first place. So if you can do that while you still have another means of income, then
Yeah.
you could just say, okay, well, how can I take the same energy or time that I was putting into this other thing and now focus on this to see if I can 10x that? So lots of great insight right there. Let's talk a little bit more about where you ended up going with Easy Terms. So you talked about some of the challenges you were seeing. And
Yeah.
at this point, you were working with them as a vendor, or how'd you come across working with
Oh no.
some of the
So
student housing companies?
yeah, so I was working at them as a vendor from a lot of universities. Anybody familiar with the space? You have on-campus housing, which is like the actual universities manage the dorms and things of that nature. And then you have off-campus housing, which has kind of blown up in the last decade, which is privately owned student housing, which has the high amenities, Class A buildings, those different types of things. And that really changed from when I went to school to when I got out of the NFL. Because when I went to school, it was pretty much everybody was living in houses. You might have one apartment complex that didn't necessarily really brand themselves as a student housing apartment, but that's where the students lived, right? And now it's like every single large major college has these big buildings near campus that is offering the highest level of amenities just strictly for students. And they built a whole business model around this. So yeah, I was working with a lot of these off-campus privately owned spaces. And I realized that like pretty much like there's like 10 large players in the student housing space that they own majority of the assets at the Power Six conferences around the country. And I realized that they were doing the same thing regularly. So they were doing this if they were doing it at Cleveland State, they were doing it at University of Kentucky, they were doing it at all these other different places. So I actually utilized my teammates when I first started my first company. I utilized my teammates that were all over the country, and I was like, hey, here goes a revenue stream opportunity. All we have to do is put together a group of cleaners, group of painters, manage the project, make sure we get in and out, things of that nature. So we did that, and I was able to get that visual from around the country of how everybody was doing things. And I realized that this wasn't a Kentucky problem. This was a national issue. And once I realized that, I was like, all right, there's an opportunity. I first tried to scale my helping hands company, and I was like, man, had employees that was like 250, 300 employees across the country at one time of the year. And I was like, this is way too much for me. Too many people call my phone. And I was like, let me try to do this technology route. And I thought that originally like the technology, people would inadvertently work for me, you know what I'm saying? And not necessarily actually work for me, if that makes sense. So the same goal was to just capture that full workforce and that capability of being able to make the work easier for the people that are on site from a management standpoint and from a worker standpoint. So that's kind of how we got to where we're at. But yeah, started off with me just being closer to the problem and seeing that there's an issue here and trying to make that issue better for everyone.
When we think about the property management companies and the challenges they face, or the inefficiencies in either
Mhm.
communication or the documentation or the follow-up, what are some of those challenges that you were facing on a day-to-day basis that you said, hey, you know what, we need to solve this?
Yeah. So you said at the beginning of the show that there was really no option if you didn't finish this term period in student housing, right? Like the issue was if that happened and their rooms wasn't ready for the students, they had to buy them hotels, and they got hotel rooms until they were ready for their rooms to be moved in. So if you're looking if you have a really bad turn time frame, you're looking at cutting into your NOI pretty steeply, just via those hotel room purchases, right? So there was pretty much a there's no failing here type of situation. And you may understand this, but when a kid is moving in, it's not really the kid's opinion that matters, it's the parents that matter. And the parents, they were the ones that were basically in charge of making sure that the next time you have to lease up, that you have a good lease up. And in student housing, they have to lease up every year, right? Because it's not like you're having 2 or 3 or 4 year tenants. You're having one tenant, and then you have to reconvince that tenant to live there again for the next school year. So that was kind of the main points behind how I knew that, hey, this was an important enough area of time that there would be value put behind making it better, instead of showing up and just getting through it again.
Yeah, I think that's important to understand, just like what that ramification is, because to your point, it's putting them in hotels and cut into the NOI. But I mean, I'm just trying to picture a college student, like you're excited to move in and get to
Yeah.
school, and where are you storing all your stuff? You just put in a hotel, you got to put in storage now. Like, this is probably a miserable experience if your room's not ready, the day you expect it to be ready for
Yeah.
move-in. So I can imagine that there's some backlash there. So what were some of the systems that these property management companies had in place? You started to allude to,
Yeah.
working with vendors and tracking to make sure that, they were actually doing what they were supposed to be doing, or they were finishing a project, or where they were in that process, and that there were some inefficiencies with the technologies that were available up to that point. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah, so like on the off-campus and on-campus space, there was an Entrada. If you guys are familiar with Entrada, they kind of taken over that area, but obviously they use RealPage, Yardi as well, in the student housing sector. And most of these softwares, they did everything from the lease start to the lease end. And we did everything from lease end to lease start. So that's kind of the gap that we filled right away. Now in the conventional space, the lease didn't end as often, right? So that a lot of these softwares were pretty sufficient. But in student housing, these leases ended every year. So we were always needed in that space. And in that space of us gaining that usability, from lease end to lease start, we've actually started to gain more traction throughout the duration of the lease, with inspections and service requests and things of that nature like that. So we've been able to show that, hey, anytime somebody comes on site to do your work, we're the platform to use. And, one of the gaps that I always like to point out that I always seen was being a vendor was that, the maintenance guys and the maintenance people that were on site, they didn't seem like they had trouble doing work. Like they seemed like they had some type of device, some type of things going on. But then when an outsider came into the property, whether it was a painter, cleaner, carpet cleaner, whoever it is, somebody that's not a internal workforce person, it was almost like them being outside of the huddle. And I always took that back for my football thing. I wanted them to feel like they were part of the team once they got inside the site, and they had the same access level to communication, same access level to job needs, all those different types of things like that. And our platform really does that well. Is it makes somebody who's not there every day with your team in team meetings and stuff like that, but when it's time for them to come to site, to have that access and capability to execute as if they were part of your team. So in that case, we've now been able to say, like, we have, thousands and thousands of vendors with our app on their phone, and they're waiting for job opportunities. And when the job opportunity hits their phone, once they show up to do the work, they don't have to be briefed. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to worry about the checks and all those different type of things. They show up as if they're a part of your team. And that's basically expanded people's workforce.
Yeah, I love how you describe that, man. It's when I'm thinking about, Rent Manager, Appfolio, Yardi, and Entrada, like a lot of these platforms, they do focus on kind of the resident experience, right? So lease start to lease end, and what you're focusing on is from the time the lease ends to the lease start, because those platforms typically, they don't, it's either rented or it's vacant. If it's vacant, they're just allowing you to put in there when it's going to be available, and that's
Yeah.
pretty much the management options that they have. And you're focusing on that process of getting that unit ready to be rented, and I think that's very helpful. You started talking about kind of bringing those other vendors into the huddle. It made me think
Mhm.
about a general contractor, because that's on a construction site. That's really that
Yeah.
GC's job, right? It's making sure that the cleaners are there, the painters know when to show up, the plumber knows when to show up, right? And it's not that the plumber and the electrician and the painters are talking to each other, but they're all talking to the GC, who is
Mhm.
helping to guide and run that. And that's obviously a very important role. But from a technology standpoint, maybe there are ways to automate that. Just talk to me a little bit more from that standpoint, because maybe we should talk about like how the program actually works, where you can
Yeah.
automate that and make sure that, that painter that's showing up on Tuesday kind of knows where they're at in the process, and, they can do their work, come in, get out, and not necessarily miss a beat there.
Yeah, so definitely. So any way we can automate things, we've been able to do that in our system, whether it's the order that you want people to go into specific units. So essentially, a lot of people in student housing, they don't like for their cleaner. Obviously, you don't want your cleaner to go in before your painter, that type of situation, right? So the cleaner has an assignment that they know they need to do, but it's not available to start until the painters are finished with their job. So that's all connected and automated. Make sure that we minimize the communication needed from an actual person, if that makes sense. So we're automating all those different types of things. Once a lease ends, you can set a sequence of work orders that you want to see go through the system before this make ready is finished. All that is advanced scheduled. So ultimately, once somebody moves out, you shouldn't have to worry about anything else until it's ready for move in. And my goal is to say we don't necessarily have this data yet, but we're looking to pull this data as like how fast are we improving turnover time frames, because that ultimately puts money back into the owner's hands, right? Is the faster we turn, the faster I get my next renter into the space, from that perspective. So we've actually seen a lot of affordable housing, people who have a list of people waiting to move in wanting to use our system because they already have a renter lined up. We just need to do this faster from this standpoint, and I'm back on the board from getting my rent collection, right? So any way that we've been able to do that, but from an automation standpoint, being able to, I like to say, we want to be as easy as it is to call an Uber driver to come to your house to pick you up. We want that to be as simple and to streamline that communication with the vendor, to build that trust with the property manager, because the worst thing that can happen is you have somebody scheduled out, they don't show up, they don't know when to come, they don't know what they need for materials for the job, all those different types of things like that. So us making that as simple as possible and as easy as possible makes it more trustworthy for the property manager to say, hey, I don't need to hire somebody to come do this stuff like internally and have a W-2 employee. Like I'm going to use all my work that's needed on my site with contractors.
It's kind of like a virtual property or a project manager, not so much property manager, but a virtual project manager that can come in, understand where things are in the system. Okay, hey, we're at this step right now. This person needs to be scheduled for, next week. And that will allow the project to move a little bit more swimmingly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
So
love it. And I know we've been talking about student housing, but it sounds like this application, really kind of could be applied beyond just student housing to, regular rentals and affordable housing, and maybe even, other construction type projects. But talk to me more about kind of the range that you see Easy Turn playing in.
yeah. So we focused on student housing because that's what we knew. And we built our foundation there. We've become the name brand product for turn management in that space. We're actually starting to offer our services in the conventional affordable space right now. So more traditional type of settings. And we're excited about where we're at now. Where I see it, our range being able to go, I think our range is pretty flexible, to be honest with you, just because of the different things that we can offer and just to make sure everybody has an understanding. Like we've been able to expand our portfolio to basically say anytime, or expand our product offering to say like anytime that there's work needed to be done on the site, we encompass that capability. So whether we just introduced a tenant portal in our system, which allows for tenants to do move-in inspections and do service requests. All that ties back to our vendor marketplace. So if a service request comes into your system, you can, instead of, if you wanted to use your in-house team, you could, but you also have the ability to say, hey, can you find me a vendor that can handle this type of service need? So we try to fill that gap of where, this may be too advanced for your current team on site, and the ball's not dropped in that space, right? You're able to utilize the workforce around you quicker instead of going to Google and things of that nature. So that capability, obviously inspections, things of that nature are all done through our system. But ideally, I like to say that anytime there's going to be work done at your site, it goes through our system. I envision properties operating staffless as we get into 3 or 5 years down the road, and being able to handle anything at the site level via an outside contractor. And I envision more people being in our system with odd jobs, whether you walk properties, you inspect properties, you do due diligence, all different types of things, and being able to make money from that perspective for any type of expertise that you may have in those spaces. So not just painters, cleaners, carpets, different things like that, but just being able to utilize the expert. One of my co-founders, he's a former like facilities guy, and he's always being asked to come help walk, come do this, and I'm like, hey man, just set up like you do this for $20 an hour and make another couple dollars right here and there type situation. But there's a lot of opportunities, and I like to say that I want the community to be able to help operate the asset. There's so many resources around the community. I think it's less need for actual on-site staff, and you can therefore start utilizing and providing job opportunities for people around from that perspective. So that's kind of our vision.
I love it, man. There's a lot to like there. If people want to learn more, they can go to ezturn.net. That's E, the letter Z, TURN.net. And learn a little bit more about Easy Turn. Chase, we're going to go to our round of insights. You ready?
Yep, let's get it.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Failure. I would say my injuries, my ACL injuries in college. So.
All right. Give me the app or digital resource you would recommend for your business.
Slack.
What's the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year?
Oh man, there's a book called U Squared. I really like that book, so I've given that too. It's just about taking what you got and being more.
All right, I like that. Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Working out focuses me. I like to do it every morning. It's kind of a meditative space for me because I feel bad from stagnancy.
All right. Give me your number one insight for managing turns.
My number one insight for managing turns is to be prepared. Like preparation. We used to have this saying in football. It's called the 5 Ps. It's preparation prevents piss poor performance. So that's the same thing in student housing turn. Is the more you prepare, the better your performance will be.
There we go. I love it. And listen, we're going to lighten the mood. Where are you located right now?
I'm in DC.
All right. So you're in DC. So give me your favorite place to grab a bite in DC.
Favorite place to grab a bite in DC? Man, let's go score the traditional Ben's Chili Bowl.
All right. Excellent. We'll do that. Listen, a lot of great information from you today, Chase. We talked about kind of your transition from, the NFL career to, being an entrepreneur, starting with holding hands, moving on to Easy Turn and being able to scale. I love how you talked about, one tip for anybody who is maybe looking to add either passive income or just kind of diversify their streams of income is to do it while you have that primary, income source coming through, whether you're an athlete, whether you're, working a W-2 job. Start that project, start that investment, start getting something else, even if it doesn't come close to what you make in your day job. Because if you can start generating income through something else, anything else, you can start getting comfortable with the idea of scaling that other thing as opposed to just being tied to that one income source. So I think that was really great insight. But then also recognizing opportunity. You talked about, being a part of these turns and recognizing the issue of, everything really focusing on the lease start to the lease end, but there's a big gap between the lease end to the next lease start in this time period. So focusing on that allowed you to create this business that has grown and scaled and actually has allowed you to do better than you were doing in your NFL career. So I think it's really important for us to understand where there's opportunity, look for those things and look to be a problem solver. And that creates opportunity for you. Again, if anybody wants to learn more, they can go to easyturn.net and, check out more information there. Chase, I just want to thank you again for being a great guest to come to Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying close and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it, man.